You must understand, when we speak of the narcissist, we are not merely speaking of an individual with an inflated ego or shallow vanity. We are speaking of a condition of the soul, a distortion of psychic energy that belongs to the archetype of the wounded child who has built a fortress of mirrors around himself. This is not only a clinical phenomenon, it is a myth, a symbol, a drama played upon the inner stage of humanity. The narcissist is the modern incarnation of ancient myths of gods who could not bear their reflection in others. Like Narcissus at the pool, he stares endlessly into his own image. Yet he is tormented not by love of self, but by the horror that behind the reflection lies nothing substantial. In this emptiness, admiration becomes a dangerous thing. For to admire another is to acknowledge that the self, the deep archetypal totality, exists not only within oneself, but is embodied in the other. The narcissist, trapped in a fragile ego, cannot bear this recognition. To admire is to bow before another's light, to allow the psyche to admit, here is someone who carries a fragment of divinity, a spark of the archetype, perhaps brighter than my own. This is unbearable. And so, what is secretly admired becomes what must be punished. You may have experienced this yourself. An individual who seems drawn to you with fascination, who studies you as if you carry a hidden power, but whose admiration quickly turns sour. One day you feel uplifted by their gaze. The next you feel crushed beneath their criticism, their withdrawal, or their cold silence. This paradox, this dance of attraction and rejection, is not personal to you. It is the manifestation of their shadow, the very qualities in you that ignite their secret admiration. Your authenticity, your creativity, your capacity for love are qualities they once longed to embody but were forced to bury. Your presence awakens in them the pain of their own unlived life. In the language of depth psychology, the narcissist projects their shadow upon the admired figure, but this projection is not merely of hatred, it is of desire, envy, and fear, all intertwined. They long for the vitality of the admired one, yet they cannot admit their dependence. They feel exposed by your very existence, for you stand as proof that what they abandoned in themselves still breathes in the world. Thus, punishment becomes their means of control, their desperate attempt to silence the reminder of their incompleteness. When I studied dreams, I often found that the narcissistic psyche dreams of great palaces, of thrones, of kings or queens who are both adored and betrayed. These symbols reveal the archetype at work, the grandiose image of the ego as sovereign, and yet, beneath the throne, a trembling child exiled from his own kingdom. The punishment of those admired is the unconscious attempt to dethrone the other, to reassert the illusion that I alone am the ruler of this inner kingdom. But the unconscious cannot be deceived. The archetype of the self rises again and again, reminding them of what they fear most, that there exists something greater than the fragile ego. Consider how myths teach us this pattern. In the story of Cain and Abel, Cain secretly admired Abel's offering, for it was received with favor by the divine, but admiration curdled into resentment, and resentment into punishment, as Cain slew his brother. This is the archetypal drama, the punishment of the admired one, the destruction of the mirror that reflects back the inadequacy of the ego. Yet, even in this destruction, the truth remains, it is not Abel who is slain, but the soul of Cain that becomes marked forever. In our modern lives, this myth repeats in subtle forms. Perhaps you know a colleague who cannot stop praising your work, but beneath their compliments is an edge of envy, and soon they sabotage you in ways that seem almost invisible. Perhaps you have loved someone who adored your light in private, but could not bear it in public, and so they belittled you, mocked you, or withheld affection. This oscillation is not a rational choice. It is the unconscious punishing the image it cannot assimilate. Now let us go deeper. Why admiration at all? Why not simply hatred? Because the narcissist is not devoid of vision. They sense, often more keenly than others, the archetypal brilliance in another soul. They can feel the fire of the anima, or the animus, the living presence of the self, shining through. It intoxicates them, like a moth drawn to flame. But because they are terrified of being consumed by this flame, they attempt to extinguish it. And so, admiration becomes the doorway to punishment. What they desire most, they must wound. What they secretly revere, they must degrade. This is the dark truth. The narcissist punishes not because you are unworthy, but because you are worthy. You carry a symbol they cannot face, and so they will attempt to break it in order to preserve the fragile house of glass in which they live. In this way, punishment is a form of possession. They seek to control the admired one, to bend them, to draw blood from the symbol so that it no longer threatens their ego's supremacy. But the psyche cannot be fooled for long. Punishment breeds only deeper shadows. The narcissist, in attempting to destroy what they admire, deepens their own wound, for they bury the very key that could lead them toward individuation. The admired one is not their enemy, but their guide, the living proof of the path they refused. Yet instead of following, they crucify. Thus, in every punishment lies a hidden confession. I see in you what I cannot accept in myself. And what of you, the one admired and punished? Here lies a profound spiritual task. For you may be tempted to internalize their punishment, to believe their cruelty is a measure of your value, but if you see with the eye of the soul, you will realize that their punishment is not about you at all. It is about their war with their own unconscious. To be admired secretly and punished openly is to stand in the fire of another's unresolved shadow. It is dangerous, but it is also revelatory, for it shows you, without doubt, the power you carry. If you were insignificant, there would be no need to punish you. And so, I tell you, do not confuse their punishment with truth. Rather, see it as the archetypal drama of shadow and light. See how admiration and resentment intertwine like twin serpents, coiling around the vulnerable ego, and know that in this dance you are not the victim of their hatred, but the mirror of their unlived life. You awaken in them the remembrance of what they abandoned. That is why they cannot leave you in peace. This is why many empaths, many sensitive souls, find themselves entangled with narcissists. For the empath carries the mirror of compassion, the gift of seeing into another's depths. The narcissist, starving for recognition of their buried self, is drawn to this mirror like a parched wanderer to water. But once they drink, they feel exposed, naked, revealed, and so they punish the very wellspring that sustains them. It is a tragic paradox. They destroy what they need most. The question then becomes, how does one survive this paradox? How does one bear the weight of being secretly admired, yet outwardly punished? The answer lies not in retaliation, nor in submission, but in recognition. To see the archetype at work is to free yourself from its grip. When you see that their punishment is not about you, but about their inability to face their shadow, you cease to internalize their cruelty. You return their projection to its source, saying silently, "This belongs to you, not to me." This is not easy, for the unconscious seeks to draw you into its play. The narcissist's drama can feel like destiny, like a binding contract written in invisible ink. But once you awaken to the archetypal dimension, you step outside the script. You become the witness, the one who sees, and in seeing, you are freed. Now, let us pause here, for we are only at the threshold of this dark truth. The punishment of those secretly admired is but the first veil. Beyond it lies the deeper mystery. What does this pattern reveal about the collective soul of humanity? Why has this archetype risen so strongly in our time? And what does it teach us about the path toward individuation, not only for the narcissist, but for us all? When we turn our gaze from the individual drama to the collective field, we begin to see that the narcissist is not merely a private figure, but an emblem of our time. Our civilization itself, in many ways, carries the traits of narcissism, an obsession with image, a fixation on appearance, a relentless need to be admired, while simultaneously resenting the very sources of inspiration it draws from. The punishment of those admired is not only a personal tragedy, it is a cultural ritual enacted daily in the theater of our collective psyche. Consider the rise of idols and heroes in modern culture. We lift them up, intoxicated by their beauty, their talent, their charisma, and yet the very next day we tear them down with ridicule, scandal, or disdain. This cycle of elevation and punishment is the collective enactment of the narcissist's secret drama. We admire those who embody what we long to be. But our admiration curdles into punishment because their very existence reminds us of our own inadequacies. It is Cain and Abel, replayed endlessly on the global stage. This tells us something profound about the archetypal forces at work. When admiration and punishment entwine, we are witnessing the trickster archetype in its shadow form. The trickster delights in contradiction, in raising one hand in praise and striking with the other. He reveals the dual nature of the psyche, the longing for wholeness and the fear of annihilation. Narcissists, caught in this archetypal possession, act as living vessels for the trickster, ensnaring both themselves and those they secretly admire in a web of paradox and contradiction. But there is also the wounded healer here, hiding behind the mask of punishment. For the narcissist, in their own distorted way, is crying out for the healing of their split soul. They punish because they cannot embrace. They admire because they cannot embody. Every act of cruelty towards the admired one is paradoxically a confession of longing for the self, but because the wound remains unhealed, the longing turns to destruction. In dreams, we often see this dynamic as a figure who offers a gift with one hand and a wound with the other. Perhaps a radiant woman hands the dreamer a golden chalice, only to pierce them with a dagger moments later. Or a majestic king blesses the dreamer, but behind him stands a shadow army ready to enslave. These dream images show us that admiration and punishment are two sides of the same archetypal coin. To receive the gift of another's light is to risk being wounded by the shadow that guards it. You may ask, why does the narcissist not simply surrender to the light of the admired one? Why not bow as the ego must bow before the self? Because the ego, when fragile, clings desperately to its illusion of supremacy. To admire openly would mean to confess its dependence, to admit its incompleteness, to yield control to the mystery of the self. This is the one thing the narcissist cannot do, and so the punishment of the admired one becomes the ritual sacrifice offered to the ego's false god. But let us go deeper still. What does this reveal about us? For we are not innocent observers. To the extent that we live in this culture, to the extent that we partake in its rhythms of admiration and punishment, we too carry within us the seeds of narcissism. Have you never admired someone secretly, only to feel the sting of envy, the impulse to diminish them in your thoughts, to find a flaw that lessens their radiance? This is the same pattern. In each of us lives a fragment of the narcissist's drama, and until we face it consciously, it will play out in our relationships, in our society, and in our dreams. This is why individuation is not a path for the faint-hearted. To individuate means to face these shadowy impulses, to admit the envy that accompanies admiration, to acknowledge the desire to punish what threatens our ego. Only by seeing it in ourselves can we break free from the projections that entangle us with narcissists outside. If we do not own our shadow, we will either punish the admired one ourselves or become entangled with those who punish us. And yet there is hope, for hidden within this dark pattern lies a secret. The qualities admired are always qualities that the soul itself possesses. If you are punished for being authentic, it means that authenticity lies buried in the one who punishes. If you are wounded for your creativity, it means creativity lies dormant in the punisher's soul. This is why they cannot stay away from you. You are the mirror of their unlived life. And so, paradoxically, every punishment carries within it a secret testimony. You hold the key they lost. Let us imagine this with a symbol. A dreamer walks into a cathedral. High above the altar hangs a radiant jewel, glowing with unearthly light. They reach toward it, and suddenly a figure in black robes strikes them, pushing them to the ground. You must not touch it. The figure says, "It is not for you." Yet the dreamer knows, deep within, that the jewel belongs not only to them, but to all. The punishment is the guardian of the treasure. The blow is the test. To claim the jewel, the dreamer must recognize that the punisher's violence is but fear of the light. So too in life, when you are punished by those who admire you secretly, you are being tested. The question is not, am I worthy? The question is, will I still hold the jewel of my authenticity, even when others strike me for it? If you can hold it, if you can remain faithful to the self within, then their punishment becomes powerless. You see through the illusion, you carry the jewel out of the cathedral, and perhaps in time, even the punisher may glimpse its light and be healed. But healing is never guaranteed. Some narcissists remain bound to the archetype, punishing endlessly, unable to surrender. For them, admiration will always be entwined with cruelty, because they cannot bear to integrate what they see in the other. And so, if you find yourself entangled with such a one, you must decide whether your path is to stay and witness, or to withdraw and protect the jewel you carry. There is no shame in stepping away from those who cannot stop punishing what they admire. For individuation is not martyrdom. The soul must preserve its flame, even if it must carry it into solitude. This brings us to another symbol, fire. The narcissist both worships and fears the fire of the admired one. They are drawn to its warmth, but terrified of its power to consume. They approach, they bask, they take, but then they strike, as if to extinguish the flame. Yet fire cannot be destroyed by blows. The more one strikes at flame, the more it scatters, leaping from torch to torch. This is why the admired one, even if punished, often rises stronger, for their light is not personal, it is archetypal. It belonged to the self, not to the ego. And so, my friends, I tell you, do not fear being admired in secret and punished in public. See it for what it is, the unconscious at war with itself. Recognize the archetype playing out, and do not let it bind you. For if you remain faithful to the jewel, to the flame, to the self within, no punishment can destroy what you are. You will become, instead, a witness to the truth that the soul is larger than envy, larger than fear, larger than the fragile mirrors of the narcissist's kingdom. If we follow the thread further into the labyrinths of the unconscious, we find that the narcissist's punishment of the admired one is not an isolated motif, but part of a larger psychic process. The eternal struggle between the ego and the self, between the mask of persona and the depth of archetype. This struggle always unfolds through relationship. The narcissist becomes the unwilling messenger of shadow, and the admired one becomes both the scapegoat and the torchbearer in the dark theater of the psyche. To understand this more deeply, we must look to the anima and animus, those inner figures who represent the soul's bridge to the unconscious, for often it is not the conscious ego that admires another, but the anima or animus stirring within. A man may see a woman who embodies the radiance of his repressed anima, and he admires her with an intensity he cannot explain, but because he has not integrated his inner feminine, admiration turns to resentment, and resentment to punishment. He cannot bear that she mirrors what he denies in himself. Likewise, a woman may punish the man she admires because he awakens the archetypal power of the animus within her, a power she both longs for and fears. Thus, the punishment of the admired one is not merely personal cruelty, it is an archetypal rejection of the soul's own inner partner. The admired one becomes the screen upon which the anima or animus is projected. Their punishment is the symbolic execution of the soul's denied half. It is as if the psyche cries out, "I cannot face the God within me, so I will strike down the God I see in you." Lo, this explains the uncanny magnetism between narcissists and their chosen admirations. The pull is not rational, it is archetypal. It feels like destiny, like a fated bond, for indeed it is the unconscious seeking to reunite with its lost half. But because the ego resists, what should be a sacred union becomes a battlefield. The narcissist wounds the very figure who could lead them toward integration, and here lies a mystery. Many who are punished by narcissists are souls destined to carry light into the shadow of others. The empath, the healer, the dreamer, these archetypes are often chosen as mirrors, for their light reflects the hidden God. But to carry this light is also to carry the cross of projection, to endure the arrows of envy, to walk through the paradox of being both loved and despised. This is no accident. It is the alchemical fire through which the empath too must pass. To learn the difference between true self and borrowed reflection, let us look at this through the lens of alchemy. In the alchemical texts, there is often a stage of mortificatio, the death in which the prima materia is dissolved, broken, dismembered, and blackened. This stage corresponds to the punishment of the admired one. The narcissist becomes the agent of dissolution, shattering the mirror in which they see their own unlived life. But for the one who endures, the punishment becomes the black sun, the solniga, out of which new gold is born. To be admired and punished is to be cast into the alchemical fire, to be broken so that the deeper self may emerge purified. Dreams of those entangled with narcissists often contain images of broken mirrors, shattered crowns, or bleeding egos. These are not mere nightmares. They are messages from the unconscious, showing that the punishment is not the end, but the necessary death of false identifications. For only when the mirror is shattered can one stop reflecting another's shadow and stand as oneself. Only when the crown is broken can one wear the true diadem of the self. Now we may ask, why has this archetype grown so prominent in our age? Why does the narcissistic pattern dominate so much of our collective psyche? The answer, I believe, lies in the imbalance of our culture. We have exalted the ego, the image, the persona to such heights that the self has been buried beneath the rubble. Our world worships appearance, fame, influence, shadows of the divine spark, not the spark itself. And so the collective unconscious has responded by producing an epidemic of narcissistic patterns. It is a compensation, a cry from the depths. The more we inflate the persona, the more we punish the soul. This is why those who carry authenticity, who embody the self in even small ways, are often punished most harshly today. They are mirrors too bright for a culture addicted to shallow reflections. Their authenticity is admired in secret, but publicly mocked, belittled, or crucified. Yet this is not a reason for despair. It is a sign that the archetype is at work. The admired and punished ones are the alchemical vessels of our time, carrying the burden of individuation not only for themselves, but for the collective. When I lectured about individuation, I often said that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. In the same way, one does not free oneself from the narcissist by fleeing the punishment, but by seeing the archetype behind it. When you see that their cruelty is the shadow of their admiration, you no longer take it as truth. You see through the mask. And this seeing itself is liberation, but do not misunderstand me. To see the archetype is not to excuse the cruelty. The punishment of the admired one is real, and it wounds deeply, but when you see it for what it is, you gain a power they do not have, the power to stand in your own self, unbroken by the projections of others. You carry the jewel out of the cathedral, even if others try to strike it from your hands, and in doing so, you become a symbol yourself. A living testimony that the self cannot be destroyed by envy, nor extinguished by punishment. And here's where the mystical implication lies. The narcissist, by punishing what they admire, unwittingly points the way toward individuation for the admired one. They become, ironically, a